So we'll have a short break. Let's say hello to John and we'll rumble in here. So.
Well, this talk will be mainly about, on this side of it, being about a chap called Victor Schauberger. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Many of you have. But he's one of the great, or he will be recognised as a great unsung hero, because he developed machines that are based on natural principles. Because all our energy is based on the hot end of the stick. The stick has two ends. On the hot end of the stick is hot nuclear, internal combustion engines, and fuels derived, fossil fuels basically. But on the other end of the stick, that runs cold. Those are all cold running machines or mechanisms. There's all kinds of things and discoveries people are making now. It's not just in what I call fluid dynamics. It's in electronics as well, because there's various circuits now which, when they switch on and are working, as they call over unity, they start to run cold. So it's very interesting. There's lots of interesting developments. Some of this is to do with, well, of course, what they call free energy devices, which is a bit of a misnomer, because we know there's nothing free, it's just how you do stuff. And nature does it best on this planet anyway, by doing things cold. So when I've done, I suppose, I started about 10 years ago, when I got interested particularly in aspects of water to do, which I call implosive, which we'll go through, you'll get the idea of some of the shapes. But it's a difference between masculine, feminine, hot, cold, centripetal, centrifugal, and how you mix those aspects to get a game, I call it. But the reason why it's so important now is because they do call it a paradigm shift, because we will have boxes which are about this big, which will put out 15 kilowatts. The recent one I've seen is a magnetic powered motor, which is driven by permanent magnets, and it's allegedly putting out 2 kilowatts. I say allegedly because unless you've seen it, touched it in the flesh, then you're a bit sort of cautious about that. But anyway, I started about 10 years ago. We'll cover some of those, or if you're interested in what's called free energy devices, one about we'll point you in a direction somewhere in the talk or at the end of the talk. I guess most people are interested in that, are they? Free energy devices. So the idea is, even if we don't possess one now, right in front of us, then we can have a look at ideas which suggest plenty of people are making them. One of the stories, the way I think about, okay, so you're out in your shed, you already know the patent route and how the NSA might pick you up and all the rest of it because it's for national security. So who are you going to tell? You develop your device, it produces 2 kilowatts, easy as pie. Who are you going to tell? How are you going to put it out to the world? Because I bet you a pound to a pinch of the proverbial, there's been thousands of people around this planet who solved this one. We know there's Kesh in Iraq. Kesh is in Iran, Iraq. Which one is it? Iran. Kesh in Iran. Heard of Kesh? Yeah. Well, if you haven't, have a look. Just put in Kesh Foundation, K-E-S-H-E. And there's who's the guy in Italy? Rossi in Italy. That's right. That looks good as well, because that's coming online. That's coming in production. Anyway, we'll talk about Schauberger. But I would find it, if I hadn't heard about this stuff, reassuring for somebody to tell me it's here already. But if you think about this, globally, what the oil and fossil fuel area is worth in terms of turning a shaft or output, that's worth in excess of $12 trillion a year, apparently, all in all. So what you're going to do is eventually make all of that redundant, because there's going to be eventually no centralised power generation, which is a big thing to say, but if you've got a box that produces this power, what do you need centralised hot nuclear for? What do you need coal-powered stations for? You don't anymore. Then you've got a whole distribution system. You've got a whole industry on top of industry which relies on this way of doing things. And people say, oh, you can't do that, you put loads of people out of work. Well, I was thinking, well, hold on a minute, what happened to the first motor car? What happened to all the farriers? And Margaret Thatcher, when she closed down all the coal mines, what happened to all them? They're all still up there somewhere, doing something. I mean, it's only, a couple of generations. We just learn to do other things. Or we do other things. But the other thing it does, it frees us up from having this weird closed loop thing we've got hang up with money and control, which is, if you've got free energy, you can own your chakras at the bottom of the garden all day long. Because you can light it, heat it, you probably might grow a bit of food, but you don't need a lot. Because that's true, that's decentralisation. That's true decentralisation. Because if you look at all the taxing systems and revenue collecting systems we have, they always like to collect it from something that you want. I.e., if you don't have enough of this, you're going to have hypothermia, so you've got to find lots of ways to collect this. But if you don't need to do that anymore, then you're kind of freed up. That's where I looked at. Anyway, I started 10 years ago, so I had lots of little thought processes and all of this. And you do come across the conventional way of looking at things, and they base that on the laws of thermodynamics and closed systems, and this, 3 laws of thermodynamics. Everything we use is built on. But having looked at it and looked at how things work out there, and even approaching all kinds of people, I wrote the 4th law of thermodynamics, which you can read up there. Don't mess with the other 3 laws, or you don't get your funding next year. Because if you go poking about, there might be stuff you find we can't control it. Just go and talk about this guy, and you see the time he spent on the planet. It was the incarnation. But he was a remarkable person because he came from not bad, fairly well-off family, and they were all foresters. So most of his siblings went to conventional university, but his mind wasn't polluted by that information. He stayed in the woods, so he was exploring the woods, he was looking at nature, and hence their family motto, which is comprehend and copy nature. So he grew up with that, it was sort of in his blood, so he found something, he had another way of looking at things. This is, for me, is one of the fundamental illustrations, really. It's just about how we like to move things and the shapes we use to move them. So you're probably all familiar with boat propellers, which is, they have all kinds of weird and wonderful designs on them. And that's obviously something's called an air screw. You stick that on the front or the top to go forward or up, so you've got an aeroplane or a helicopter. But it's all based on the same shape, which is, different variations, slight variations of this. And that's the sycamore seed. And that's designed to do one thing. I.e., when it falls off the tree, it's designed to slow its fall. You can either glide, like some seeds do, or float. That does it by spinning. And when it's spinning, what it's doing is slowing itself down. It's a braking motion, slowing down. It wants to break its fall. So when it's breaking its fall, it means it can drift off and then freeze. It's just nature's one way of doing it. But we've adopted that to generate these. And these are designed to do what? Push, aren't they? Or propel. So one's designed to slow something down, and the other one is using the same shape to speed it up. So they're using the wrong shapes. It's totally the wrong shapes. And the reason you know this is because there's lots of, they're very good now, the engineers, but they get a problem on the tips of these when this is spinning at a certain rate. They get a decrease in pressure as the blade screws through the water as it's spinning, and it either gets one of 2 things really. One's prop slip, where the whole prop moves like a water paddle and nothing much happens, or when it's going through the water, it gets what's called cavitation on the tip, and that causes all kinds of engineering problems. And what they're trying to do now is engineer out anything to do with cavitation at high speeds, because they want to go faster, but they never will. They will never go faster because they're using the wrong shape to accelerate fluids. So when the faster you spin this, as we'll see, there's other shapes we're going to look at. Anyway, we've just got back that one for a minute because it'll come out in the talk. But as you spin this, the more resistance there is, the hotter it gets, the more fuel you have to burn. So there's no getting around that, the way the shapes are. So what they're doing is, it's all centrifugal, all the energy is going out, it's going from the centre out, that's centrifugal, on the spiral if you like, but that's the energy, it's dissipating, so you've got to keep putting more in. There is the opposite shape, which is the one we're going to get onto to do with Schauberger, which winds inside. It's called in-winding flow. We never taught any of this. We're always talking about gravity and drag. Nobody ever talked about levity and zero resistance. We'll have a look tonight. Anyways, as part of his history as he grew up, it's obvious what they're doing here, because 100 years ago they used to chuck all the wood, cut it down, haul it to the river's edge by horse, and they'd throw it in the river, and it'd be up to the river to carry it down to the sawmill. And there's lots of interesting things about this in terms of what Schauberger was studying, because they would get a better return or more timber down to the mill if it was cold and a full moon. And what he's looking at is something that we'll see in some of the geometries, a spiral flow. If you get a spiral flow down a river, which is stronger in winter than in summer, water's a bit like us. Because if it's warm, it gets a bit sluggish and slows down, just like we do. If it's cold, it sort of tightens up and gets stronger. So he was studying this, so he noticed this over the years that he was harvesting timber, and we jump forward a couple of decades now, because his ideas were against the mainstream. He was, as far as people, well, it was big business, hydrology and controlling water runoff. One of the reasons for that was because they wanted to straighten rivers to get more traffic up the Rhine and the Rhone to the industrial heartlands and shift more stuff. And the way they were doing that was actually straightening the rivers, which is they were felling the trees, straightening out all the wiggly bends in the river, and all that sort of thing. And Schauberger was just going crazy. He said, "You're mad, you're going to kill the country. If you destroy the rivers and the forests, you destroy your land completely. You don't only lose the water, you get a very short hydrological cycle. You don't get the full hydrological cycle that Schauberger was interested in, where you need a natural vegetative cover, because you have to keep the land cool. And to keep the land cool, anyway, we'll go into some of that. So, anyway, they'd harvested all the lower timber, so they'd taken the money, the easy money, you might say, so there was still timber up in the mountains. So, at the same time, there's, I can't remember his full title, it was something like the Prince von Lippe. And this guy owned square miles, they probably still do, but he lost most of it on the gambling tables, but it was his wife who knew about Schauberger. She wasn't too concerned that he wasn't mainstream, to coin a phrase, but she heard about his ideas and believed in them and said, "Can you build something that will get the timber out from the higher ranges of the mountains? Then we can get some more loot and, we're all fluid again." This is words keep coming up, I want to do with water anyway. So what she suggested to him was that if you go halves on the investment, but if you put in half, we'll put in half, then you can have a return on your investment. And what they had to do is get 1,000 cubic feet of timber down the mountain in a day. So what Schauberger came up with are these log flumes. And they're built on a particular principle. That's the pointy end of an egg. And there's a particular geometry that his son worked out later on. So his grandson's still alive, Jörg Schauberger, and he's in Bad Ischl in Austria, which is that area where Schauberger came from. So high mountains, loads of virgin woodland, exactly as nature had left it. So this is his design of it. As we go on, you'll find out that the shape water makes, it goes down in plug holes, called a hyperbolic. That's the shape of the edge. And mathematically, the inverse of the hyperbolic is the egg. And this is how you generate that shape. So it's still using the shapes, the egg shape, the pointy end of the egg, to make his log flumes, which is there. You can see how they're building it. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing too remarkable about it. But what is interesting is the surveyors and the engineers were asking him, well, where do we take it? Where's it supposed to go? He said, follow the river as near as you can. Follow exactly the river. So if the river's bending, you bend as closely as you can. And that's why you see a real engineer. He'd do a straight line down there because he knows he's going to save material. But the point about this, the most efficient way to move a fluid is not a straight line. It's not a straight line because there's 2,000 miles of capillaries in your body. Thin warm blood vessels. 2,000 miles, imagine that. It might be 3,000 for some of the larger ones amongst us. So, and there's no straight lines. All of that is done on branching spirals. Every part of it. And the body also manages the electrical, if you like, conductivity of the vessels and the blood. That's why grounding is so important. If you're not grounded, you don't feel very well. And I mean literally grounded, either with plates, because we're all walking around rubber shoes. We're never grounded, so there's lots of ailments coming from that. So there's a health thing. Have a look at grounding. But anyway, so what the body's doing and what the rivers are doing, if you want to, it's not so much controlling, it's the natural way water flows. So anyway, that's why they made windy fluids. That was the design. And the profile didn't change, it was pretty much that. There was lots of clever bits to do with sorting the timber. And you can find out about there's several black and white videos from the Second World War about this sort of information, or these flumes working, which were very clever, some of them. And basically, this is what I was talking about earlier. So that's the masculine energy. This is where we're using all our power generation at present. It's going from the inside out. And it can be characterised as the masculine energy. The centrifugal energy, if you like, the yin or the yang, whichever it is. But you've just got like a mirror. And you can actually draw a mirror and do the opposite, because instead of going from the inside out, you can go from the outside in. And when you do that, you get a whole bunch of other stuff happening, which gets quite interesting. This illustration, and lots of the illustrations I'm using, are coming from, there's 4 books written. The way they were translation by a chap called Callum Coates through Gateway Books, and that was Alex Bartholomew way back who printed those. Callum's still alive in Australia because I was just talking to somebody who worked with him for 5 months to get some of the geometries to do with some of the repulsins, the clemators, and all kinds of exotic sounding gear. But anyway, this one, like I said, the faster you go, the hotter you get, the more resistance. This one, the faster you go, in winding flow, the colder you get, and the less resistance. The faster you go, the less the resistance. The faster you go, the more resistance. But we're never told about this. It's never, we'll find out anyway. It's just not explored. Not mainstream anyway. Because I thought when I was learning about Schauberger, I'm going to find it. I'm going to do a degree course in implosion, I am. So I had a good look around. Guess how many courses there are in implosion. Anyway, that's telling you pretty much the same thing. It's not replicating very well, but it's just looking at anomaly points, you might say. Now the books, I've got to mention those, there's 4 of them. They're called the Eco-Technology series. And they're all based on Schauberger's notes. There's one with a sort of blue cover. I'll have to look it up what it's called. It might be the Energy Evolution, but it's got it looks like a flying saucer on the front. That's repulsin, which is one of the gadgets that Schauberger developed on these principles. Anyway, we're going to sort of jumping around, but the shapes, as it turns out, this is a river profile, and as the river goes down the valley, it naturally spirals. It always wants to spiral. So when it's going around that bend, it's spiraling that way, clockwise. When it starts to go around that bend, it spirals anti-clockwise. So this was the direct observation from nature, how he designed up to the shapes he did with his log flumes. And of course you need a holding pond, so he designed an egg-shaped holding pond, and there's a whole bunch of stories, I won't spoil it for us, all kinds of stories, to do with the resistance of the establishment to his ideas. His ideas worked, but everybody didn't like it because they were too sort of revolutionary. It's not a very good illustration, so sorry about that, it doesn't pick up very well. But basically he's got a holding pond, this is to do with his log flumes. And he's let the water in, and when it comes into the holding pond, it's starts to layer itself. Water is the most peculiar substance. For example, it's at its densest at 4 degrees, plus 4 degrees. I don't know if you all know that, but it's the only substance we know that it'll float on itself when it's in its solid state. Everything else sinks. You kind of look at it and think, if I was designing it, it shouldn't do that, you know, but it does. It's got some amazing, obviously it's got loads of amazing qualities, but the reason it's important here is if you increase the density of the water, you've got more buoyancy for floating your logs. So what he did was he took the water from the bottle here and injected it into his log flume, which we've just seen the profile of, and spun it. He put it in at a tangent. He didn't just let it rush in. He put it in at a tangent, which means at at the edge of a circle, it's going to start spinning. So like when you stir your coffee, you don't do it in the middle, you do it on the edge. Stir it round the edge, and you can see the nice dimple in the middle, which is a hyperbolic. So that's what he did. So he injected it into his log flume that way, or introduced it, which created enough buoyancy to put to float his logs. But there were several things that happened which were kind of, involved all kinds of weird and wonderful happenings, because they have some timber which is heavier than water. And that was the test for him on the night before, the day before the inauguration. He dropped one of these sinkers in, I don't know whether it's a large or something like that, and opened the sluices or let the thing go. It didn't float. So he was a bit sort of walking around the edges. And anyway, he went away to sit and to think about this, and he sat down. And as he sat down, he sat on a snake. And he picked the snake up and flung it into the holding pond that we were just looking at. And when he watched it, it did a particular sinusoidal, you might call it, like an S shape, which is not surprising in a snake. But it clicked something in his memory, because it wasn't just going from side to side, it was like a corkscrew, like a flagella does. It wasn't just doing that like a fish. It was spiraling. Anyway, it reminded him, so what he did is he went back and rifled all the bends on his log flume. And they put large strips on there, rifling causes a spin. Barrels are rifled in guns. So what it was doing was inducing the spin, so it would go that way as it went around a right-hand bend, it'd be spinning clockwise to induce the spin. And he did that throughout the night. It was just the sound of hammering to get these vanes on. And in the morning when it opened up the sluice, it worked. And the logs would go down the flume. There's just an illustration to show you that when you look at a flow of water, you only really see the surface. That's the surface here. But the river is doing all sorts of things. For one thing, the laminar flow is now corkscrewing down the river. So these are small temperature changes, they're like 1/10 of a degree, but the point about it is the coldest water is in the middle. And that accelerates, as long as it's allowed to, down the middle of the river. And it creates the shape, if you like to call it the correct shape of the river. I don't know if you've ever looked at your shower curtain, or your bath, or your sink, and watched the water drip down it, or the rain. You must have done that. Everybody must have done that. So the question I'd ask you is, does it go straight down? Does it? Does it go, what's it do? It does a little dance, doesn't it? It does a little dance. It doesn't go straight down, it does a little spirally dance. And when you look at that, if you did a freeze frame, that will spirally dance when it really gets going, and then it starts to wiggle, and it wiggles more, and then it sort of cuts itself off and runs through the middle again. It'd be like looking at the time lapse. The shower curtain would be like looking at a time lapse of a river in its floodplain, because it's exactly what the river does. And when it nips off a bend or it's flooded, it leaves an oxbow lake, different places. And if you look at that over time, or if you study your ripple, it's hard to see. You can see it when you look at time lapse on the river. Those bends, those loops, those skeins of water move upstream. The water's going downstream, and all the loops go upstream. So Schauberger knew all this stuff. He knew tons of stuff. But he makes dramatic statements in the books. And since I read them 10 years ago, I used to be a whitewater instructor. I got in a canoe when I was 4. So I've been around rivers all my life and the ocean. What was I saying? I was on the point there. What are we talking about? Oh yeah, the wiggly woggly water. How the water wiggles. Now what he said was, if you keep your land and your forest in a natural way completely and you manage the temperature of the water, it will never flood. It will never ever flood. He said it's impossible. It cannot flood. And I've been working a lot up in the Peak District of the Park now. ISIS is here tonight. And I've been looking at the rivers up there and there are lots of rain, no flooding. A bit of debris here and there, but no flooding. So there's something about the temperature of the water and the shape it runs which allows it to flow naturalistically down the mountains so it's not flooding. And what have we got right now? Everywhere. Flooding. So what's happened to cause the flooding? Well, if you want to get a good flood, cut all the trees down, straighten all the rivers, put in your storm drains, cover things with concrete, alter the temperature gradient of the land, and you get loads of floods. Magic. Anyway, that's the longitudinal vortex. This is, he went on to develop these ideas. He went on to sort of concentrate a river into a machine. And what you've got here is, the reason this illustration is here is because of this point. The water's wound up as it goes down the mountainside, and it winds one way, suddenly winds the other, and it seems to build up so much energy, it gets to this point which he called the energy cannon, and all the energy does it is wound up like a spring inside itself somehow, and it releases there, dumps it, and then starts winding the other way. So that hence how you get the different shapes. But that's called... Sorry?
It's all the atoms. It's so simple.
Yeah.
It's a Tesla. It's a Tesla coil.
Yeah, Tesla coil, yeah, exactly.
That's all it is. Nikola Tesla knew all that.
Yeah, that's right.
It's so simple. All the winding does is charging.
Yeah.
So there's no need to say all that.
Well,
Just coming down.
It's so simple. That's how I think it is. It just baffles me how people go on about the windings and that. It's just atoms. Atoms when they come cold, like your first one before that. The one where you said the water follows it. Well, it's logically going to follow it because when it gets colder, the electrons are coming closer to the nucleus, which is a magnet. So the positive of the water behind is bound to drag to it because it attracts.
Well, do you know that? Does everybody else know this?
No.
Anyway.
Yeah, but I didn't know if you get to that point. I just say it's so simple to understand. All this logic of our people have said it in the past has been suppressed from us.
Yeah, that's really.
The engine to run the airways will be here.
There's a lot to be said about Byde in all sorts of ways because you talk about Tesla and they got amazing effects when they shut a circuit. Because they had too much power when they shut the circuit once they'd induced it or at the beginning, which is reminds me of this point here. So you're engineering around various points once you know what once you realise what you've seen.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
It's all right.
It's so simple. Now I know a bit about it.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to come and do the talk. Show us.
No, I didn't know if you get to that stage to explain to these people.
Oh, it's time yet. We've got, we've got a quarter of an hour.
It's about 10 minutes less.
Do you know what?
Not yet.
Sorry, I don't disagree with anything you said, but anyway, this is just something to do with another way of looking at rivers and how they actually run. Again, you've got a laminar flow, and this point here shows you the acceleration, because it accelerates down the hill logically when it's denser, or heavier, and that's when it gets colder. There's just another way of looking at our beautiful rivers. Fortunately, that's the ideal model. What in fact it does in all of these different layers is have a turbulence, or a self-braking mechanism. And if water didn't have that self-braking mechanism that we call turbulence, it would pour straight down the mountain and there'd be no mountains. They'd all be gone within a few thousand years because of the power of water when it's moving. If you double the flow, you cube the amount of material it can shift. So you don't have to increase the flow much before you're moving mountains or big rocks. So fortunately, under the usual circumstances, it breaks itself on each of these layers, slows down, it just does it naturally. And here he's looking at different profiles to do with the river. Anyway, there's a lot to be said. There's a whole story to be told about that, because they're actually river doctors in Austria who re-established the flows using steps and energetic bodies down the river. I'll show you an energetic body in a minute. This is one application of these ideas, which is, well, it's for water purification. That's just a wooden rim here, and in it it's got a flute which spins the water. And those you can pick these up from the books. They don't come out here at all. Well, that's the sort of profile of one of the flutes. But what he wants to do is this. That shows better. There's the flutes. And what he's doing is creating, as it goes down the gradient, this spiral in motion, which you can see in this toroidal spiral, which allows the water in the middle to accelerate almost frictionlessly through the centre of the pipe, once it's established its flow. The other thing it's noticed is that for purification, most bacteria are anaerobic, either they like oxygen. And when you spin it like this, you get all the oxygen out to the periphery where the bacteria are, so it kills them. Plus you've got colloidal silver from these silver veins. Anyway, apparently it worked. I haven't tried it. But if you wanted to try it on your grey water, you could. You wouldn't need a very big pipe. The main problem with this is it's got to be running in a full condition. It can't be half full. Not easily. You have to do a slightly different design. But that's basically what's going on there. And it's accelerating away from you through the picture down there. And he called this a breathing pipe because this is made of naturally grown wood. So it could exchange oxygen across almost like a membrane. And the other thing he did was, it didn't quite come to fruition, it was made him, but it was for moving heavy objects like coal, because once you've got the flow going like this and you put solids in there, they don't touch the sides, they go down the middle. This is the energy body to retrain a flow, so you've got a wayward river somewhere on your land, and you put in these energy bodies, just an egg, tethered on the bottom, and it causes this spiral flow around it. And you can see it's accelerating because of the dip in the water. As far as I know, there's hardly anybody using these. As you can imagine, if you understood the spirals, what it would do to storm drains, you might be able to drain water away faster just by spinning it. There's another illustration of this shape. That's crop duster, they call it. And it's under what's called very high wing load, because it's just coming out of a dive like that, and somebody's put a smoke canister there, just so you know the shape, which is down spiral. And this spiral, in this condition, it comes off all of these surfaces here, and off the propeller, and off the tail. Everything is creating these little spirals, different size spirals, but we call them drag, when in fact it's lifted in the wrong direction. We haven't got our shapes right, you see. That's the basic shape. We've got our shapes wrong. So these are just some of the illustrations of it. That's about 100 miles down there. And that looks like the profile of a jellyfish. So they're using the shapes, they're managing the vortexes for minimal effort to move along through fluids. That's just a jet that's flown low over cloud base. So that one spirals that way and that one spirals that way, because on the wing you've got a high pressure zone up here and a low pressure zone under the wing. So it's sucking itself, if you like, in the air. Still using the wrong shapes though. They're bloody tin cans. I mean, what we're doing flying about in those things that belong in a museum as of at least 50 years ago, I don't know. Tesla was around the turn of last century, never mind this one, was talking about going pole to pole in a matter of minutes. Electrogravitic flying. Anyway, this is like the build-up to it, to that sort of technology, because these are some of the shapes he was replicating. I showed it earlier, but I didn't mention it. But there's a horn on an antelope which looks like this. It's called a kudu, and that particular spiral is the one he's lifted to make most of these shapes, depending on what he wants to do. And all of these are made of copper, because that lends itself to make best to the shapes and the way. I don't know what you'd call it. I was going to say electricity, but he called it bio-magnetism. He didn't call it electricity as we know it. He wouldn't use those terms. And because of what he was discovering, he invented new terms. He was talking about qualigens, dynagens, and fructogens, in how the water and cargo, as he called them, mixed. And the reason he was talking that way is he was mixing fluids and gases on what he called a positive temperature gradient. What he meant by that wasn't that it got hotter, it's because it got colder. He was saying at a positive temperature gradient, it goes from 0 to 4 degrees, or from 100 to 4 degrees. That's a positive temperature gradient. And the point I'm making about that, because he developed these terms, is nobody else was doing it. So he was inventing terms to show what he was discovering. It's like saying, if nobody's been there, why would they bother to name it? They've got to name it something. It was a while ago, actually, Secret Garden Party, somebody stood up and said, well, has he been peer reviewed? And I thought, oh, this since, quite a lot. I thought, he didn't have any. He was like Tesla, he didn't have any peers, there was nobody else doing it. So he was inventing terms, qualigens, dynagens, fructogens. And he was talking about a process which happens on a positive temperature gradient. We know all our pharmaceuticals that we generate, I bet they're nearly all on the hot. So you can imagine what you possibly can create on the descending or positive temperature gradient. There's at least as much again, and probably far more beneficial. This is what I'm thinking about anyway. So these are some of the shapes he was generating to do a variety of things, some probably more successful than others. But in order to do this, when he was doing it, was extremely difficult. To be able to get a spiral on a pipe, and not only get a spiral on a pipe, but it's got a large diameter there at the start and it does at the finish, on a precise ratio. Anyway, it's just illustrations of how nature does it. She's just using temperature gradients to generate some of the most powerful forces on this planet. Hurricanes, tornadoes, all of these phenomena, all vortical movement. So if you want to figure out the horsepower, that's Florida down there, it looks like it. So that's several hundred miles across of circulating high velocity air. If you calculate the horsepower in that, that'd be pretty big. And it's got no moving parts. There's no veins, there's no fins. Clever old girl, Mother Nature, I know she does that. Anyway, there's a spiral nebula. And these are some other shapes, you can look them up, you'll find them in the books. But nature uses these shapes for all kinds of reasons, doing all sorts of things. Homes for, creatures, how they build them. Cochlea of the ear is in there somewhere. Probably that one, which is built into your ear. And that's designed to accelerate a fluid on a spiral in 3 dimensions, because you've got one that way and another with a tilt slightly the other way. What it's doing is you've got hairs in there, and as that water moves, that fluid moves, it tells you which way up you are. Because you don't have a spinning gyroscope in the middle, do you? So how do you know which way up you are? Wood stops falling over, that's how nature does it. So a lot of these shapes, I put this one in because at the time, this is a couple of years ago, this crop circle appeared, and this is one of these trout turbines, so-called. These are other ways of moving and, you might say, purifying water. This one was developed at Forest Grove by John Wilkes. He passed a couple of years ago. But basically the water does a beautiful little, what's called a lemniscate, a figure of 8. As it dances down there, it re-energizes the water and everything just regrows, purifies the water and sediment drops out. Good stuff. And the other guy, if you're interested in how nature generates shapes, including hearts and how they partially, some of it is Theodore Schwenk. There's a whole talk you could do, I would recommend, to do with the fluid movements we talk about here, which does not include the word pump, is Frank Chester. He's from the Steiner schools, and he's developed all the geometry of the heart and how it works, which is not a pump. Does anybody know what I mean when I say the heart is not a pump? There's a couple know. When it sounds a strange thing if most people's being brought up to believe the heart is a pump. But the pump, to my mind, is a masculine thing. So don't forget, you've got 2,000 miles of capillaries and a viscous fluid to go down there. and you're going to use a pump. Okay, guys, we'll get together, we'll get our cylinder, and we'll put a piston in there, and then every couple of seconds we'll give that a good wallop, and we'll see how much we get out the end of the 2,000 miles of capillaries. I bet it's natural. I bet there's nothing that comes out the other end. So the heart cannot be working like a pump. Anyway, I know there's things like, salts, osmosis, temperature gradients, but the main thing about the heart is it's not a pump. The other thing is the pressures induced in that pumping motion that we talked about, that I just mentioned, the muscular one, are enormous. And the bottom of the heart is paper thin. It would just blow out on the first go. Poof. Neat. So it cannot be working on the masculine forces, it's working on vortices, which are all could call them. It's managing vortices. In fact, someone's getting mixed up, which one's going in the right ventricle. Is it going in the right ventricle? Do you know? Comes in one, goes out the other. Right ventricle will say it's going in the right one.
This isn't the wrong one.
No, it's going to be the right one. Anyway, it's coming in the right, I don't know which ventricle mixed up, but what it's doing when it comes in there, if you look at the shape, it's actually slowing the blood down. That blood is rushing through there so fast, it's slowing it down on one side. As it moves to the left ventricle, it's spinning it out like a potter's wheel. Yeah. So on one side, it's hard to see, it's being slowed down by the vortical motion that's coming in the bottom of the heart. The bottom of the heart's triangular. That breaks a vortex that slows it down. And then the change in shape of the heart moves it to the left ventricle and it accelerates out. And there's 7 layers to the heart, if you look at them. Anyway, look at Frank Chester. If you want to know how to move a fluid efficiently, study the heart. And there's nothing masculine as I would think about it. Because it's not, therefore it cannot. But it's a misnomer. You've got to call it a fluid mover. Pump's no good. The other thing that Schauberger, I mean, he was around with some brilliant thinkers. There was all kinds of people about. I'm sure he was exchanging views with them, not just mainstream, who were a bit rigid. And he came up with he called it, if you want to move something efficiently, whether it's a flying saucer or a fluid mover, you're going to be using 3 forms of planetary motion. It sounds a weird thing to say. And the 3 forms of planetary motion are spin, orbit, and circulation. You've got your orbit around your central sun, and you've got your own spin on your axis, and all the planets are laid out on a particular frequency to do with their spin and their orbit. It's a self-organizing structure. So the question you might ask is, if you slowed the Earth down to it, or if you stopped it, where would it go? I don't think it would stay where it is. I think it would be off somewhere. So it's all to do with spiral. There are no straight lines. Everything is spinning, and everything is orbiting something else. So there's an illustration, a cool one here, but that is the sun, and these are all the planets that are circulating around the sun as it goes through. I don't know how far that is, might be a year, probably a year. So you've got a big spin for one, and the inner planet's a much lower spin, and you've only got one for the slower moving outer planets. But it shows, when you look at that, it looks like a coil to me. Anyway. That's some of the geometry he was involved with. This is another illustration from a guy called Rodney Collins Smith from his book, Theory of Celestial Resonance, he called it. Because he was stuck on just, you see, NASA would give you a dartboard and say all the planets go around the sun in the middle. That's you lot. You're done. It's astronomy 101. It's absolute crock of shit. Because it can't be a dartboard. We're spiraling through space. We're either rising following the sun, or we're falling following the sun, depending on which way you think up is. So why would that be important? Well, before we discovered the so-called New World, we thought the world was flat. That kept you at home, didn't it? It stopped you sailing over the horizon. And that the world was flat, supported by 4 elephants. And if you go too far, you'll fall over the edge. So you're never going to find the New World if you believe that. So if you don't get the shape of your space right, you ain't going anywhere. You've got no comprehension of where you are, what you are, or anything else. You're always going to be stuck on the rock. I don't think there's any problem with that. But if you want to explore or maybe fly about, then you're going to have to know how things work. In the shape, I call it the shape of space. So these are quite well illustrated now. I think the guy was Dr. Bart, I think it is, an Indian doctor. of medicine rather than astronomy came up, well, reinforced these ideas. And basically what the the search term is, we don't orbit the sun. And you think, hold on a minute, you can't say that. That's like saying the heart's not a planet, come on. Well, when you think about it, you've got the mass of the sun, which is caused with a wobbly axis because of the mass of the orbiting planets having an effect on the sun. So there's nothing in the middle. We're orbiting nothing. We're orbiting masses around nothing. We do not orbit the sun, we orbit or spin with the sun. Now you've got a different shape of space, a different way of looking at things. You're not so stuck on the flat earth with the four elephants, are you? You know what I mean? You've got to know the shape of space and how things circulate. So you've got planetary motion, three forms: orbit and spin with precession, little wobble, and circulation. Now, whatever your material's made of, and you've got orbit and spin, you're going to generate circulation, whether you like it or not. It's a bit like putting a potential down a wire. Hey, Presto, you get a magnetic field. I didn't want that. Well, tough, mate, you've got it. If you're doing that, you'll get in there. So that would be your circulation. Around anything that's spinning and orbiting, you will have a circulation of some description. It might be electric, it might be magnetic, it might be some substance I don't even know about. But if you get the spin right and the orbit right, then you get it. It leads on to some very interesting things, because spin rates aren't just to do with planets, it's to do with molecules. Because they all tell us they're all spinning. And the best illustration I've seen, I mean, the one I got from the kid was a little atom doing that, not too different from this, which looks ever so clunky with modern technology. So if you have a look at, there's the Breakthrough Energy Movement, the BEM conference, which was just a few weeks ago. And I don't know if you've heard of Gamble. Have you heard of Gamble? I can't remember his first name. But if you look up Gamble and BEM, you'll find him. Now, Gamble is the other half of Procter & Gamble, so he's got a few bob. And he spent some of it recently to research alternative ways of looking at space and generating power. Because he wants what I want, and probably what you want, which is a little box, flying about stuff. Of course, once you've got the flying about, there's no passports. You've got no port to pass. So you've got no boundaries, you've got no borders. So that means when you've got one of these, you can fly over Afghanistan, India, a bit of America. They've got all their little gates, borders. They're guarding so ferociously. And you can say, hi guys, how you doing? Have a pizza and a beer. You all right? And you go over this side, oh mate, have a pizza and a beer. And they go and think, what are you guarding? Because when you can move about freely in space, you're on board. It doesn't mean to say you're not going to enjoy your Geordie accent and ours and go, yeah, just fly back there. It means you can go across anywhere on this planet within a matter of hours. Anyway, if you have a look at the Breakthrough Energy Movement, Gamble's talking, there's a whole bunch of other people up there who've got interesting talks. Bryce, what's his first name? There's a whole bunch of them. And of course there's Dollard, don't forget you like Dollard. Come across him yet? Dollard? Have a look at his stuff.
He's gone off the rails, he went back on the crack.
He went back on the crack, did he?
Yeah, he tried to burn his own lockdown.
Oh no.
And a bit mad 2 weeks ago.
Oh, that's the best of us, eh?
Yeah.
So there's these people have done all sorts of things. They're not just limited to geniuses like, they're called geniuses like Tesla or Schauberger. There's plenty of them about now. They're all beavering away doing stuff. But anyway, that's some of the ideas to do with spin and orbit. Oh, there is a few. Well, it depends how much time we've got.
We can do about another 10 minutes before people's bladders explode. So.
Ah, good. Have you nearly had enough? Yeah. You're right. There's another interesting thing about spin, which you can find. It's I think I tried to find a video the other day and it was taken down and I didn't record it. And it's done in the Mir spaceship, and they did a very weird, beautiful little experiment. They put a wing nut, a little wing nut on a threaded rod. You all know what those are, those two are, yeah? And what they've done in the zero gravity is spun the wing nut, and it comes floating off the end of the bar perfectly, spinning gorgeously. And then it inverts. So it's now spinning, it's now going in the same direction, it's just back to front. But what you'd expect is that it would spin the other way, but it doesn't. It's still spinning the same way. shouldn't do that really, but to my mind it is absolutely fascinating because it's not talked about in any physics. I can't read all the Russian, but what it tells me is anything that's spinning will invert its pole, literally, unless there's a couple of things that modify it. One thing, the wing nut that changes and swaps and is still spinning the same way. The way you do it is you rotate your spin axis through 180 degrees on a particular curve, which it generically calls a cycloidal space curve. And now you're spinning the opposite way, going in the same direction. Now the wing nut one is in the same plane as it's travelling. The Earth isn't. The Earth's at 90 degrees. Because a lot of talk about pole changes, if they know what it means. I can't say I do. But this could be one explanation, is that it actually is flipped its poles. Still spin the same way, so the sun's still coming up, only now you're in the southern hemisphere. And I reckon if it would do that, it would take it about 3 days. And that's referred to in ancient texts, the 3 days of darkness. Because in those 3 days of darkness, all your electromagnetic spectrum is a bit messed up. So you've got nothing to see. After 3 days, it all comes back online. It's all stabilised, but now you're upside down. There might be modifiers to this, so we don't all panic. And in my mind, I think you need a bit of a drag on the way you move. That's where the moon comes in handy. It's just a theory. I was just thinking through spinny stuff, and I was looking at the Mir spacecraft experiment. I thought, oh, maybe everything does that, even to the atomic level, down to what we call atoms. And the faster they spin, it depends on what they radiate. Some of these drawings are not just Schauberger, but Tesla's work as well, because this is called the terrestrial biocondenser which we live in. And some of these closer, for example this one, I mean even closer than that actually, these are all different layers. Harp's messing with all this stuff up here. But at these closer layers, for example the closest one to the Earth, do you know something you might see every day that would tell you what the layer was on this condenser? I don't know if you know what a condenser is. So it's just like a potential, there's no flow of current, it's just a potential across a gap. That's negative, that's positive, and there's a potential in the middle. It makes layers. And that's what we do because really we're transducing the energy of the sun. That's coming into our biosphere, it comes into our magnetosphere, Van Allen belts, the magnetosphere, atmosphere, upper atmosphere. It makes various layers. And the one closest to the Earth that's easy to see, do you know what illustrates it best? What? Clouds. Now, why would they do that? How do they do it? Well, the point about the way you know where that layer is the base of the clouds. The cloud base is 300 feet, 400 feet, say. And all the clouds have a little base all the time. You don't see one at 150 feet going down the main street. You don't see one at 1,000 feet, and another 3,000. They're all the tops are doing different things, but all the bases are rather nice. You've got perspective as you approach the horizon, obviously, so it looks like they're close on that one. Which interests me, and that changes day on day, depending on other factors like air pressure, things like that. So it's very interesting to think about, and all sorts of ways to do how things work, how nature does it. So I would suggest to you that birds only fly to cloud base. They won't go above the cloud base because you might call it electrical potential changes above the cloud base. So they no longer fly so well. Because birds aren't just flying because of the Coanda effect, because they're moving in the air. They're charged particles, they're a charged unit in that space. As soon as they leave the ground, and you're moving air over feathers, it's like charging amber by rubbing it with silk. You've got to get a charge on a creature. So that's my theory. And insects don't fly much above treetops because of this biocondenser to do with the Earth. I haven't tested it actually. I haven't been up there with my kite or my microlight to see if there's anything flying about up there. But that's just my feeling. Some of this now comes on to my experiments because early days of doing this, I set up a Vortex on the back of my house, which is just a Coke bottle. I didn't drink the contents. I used that to clean the engine as a week ago. I used the Coke bottle to, it's not the one.
If you live in flats,
See? Prove my theory. Ace!
We're just getting more determined insects.
I mean, these days we're getting the insects anyway.
Worked. So this is my little experiment. I mean, this is an evolution. This is Mark III, this one. This is quite posh. Because there's your Coke bottle, alright? That's your plastic bottle, 2 litre Coke bottle. And what I've done is I've got 5 injectors, these little brass injectors are made. And they're squirting water in all the way around, so that's spinning. And at the bottom where the cap is, I've made a hole. It took me ages to tune that hole. I was taking it off, putting it back on to get the flow right, so it's flowing out. But I've got a lot of water going in there. And it's all coming out of a hole, which is probably just over 1/8 of an inch. I was looking at this, and it's, it's on full belt on the tap, and I think, how's all that water getting out of that tiny hole? Oh, it's bloody marvellous, this. Anyway, so I looked at that, and I've heard about, the egg being the inverse of the hyperbolic and stuff like that. I thought, what happens if you put an egg in a tornado? What happens if you put an egg in there? What's going to happen? So I found this chicken's egg. So for this one, not very inventive, I know, but for this, it should have been like a quarter of that size for this proportion of spinnings. Anyway, I'll switch it on you to get the gist. So, it's just on the tap down here somewhere, and it's divided into 5 by the tubes, by the windscreen wiper gadgets on the car. So I went to the scrappy and got loads of those and cobbled it together and soldered all these little brass tubes up, and it'll lead on to a story, these brass injectors, because I wanted to create the spin. It's telescopic actually, because I can stretch it, so that's another one. So this thing is floating up and down in there. That's just the vortex. And you can look it up on YouTube, because my feed on that's called Twisted Water Starter. Anyway, you can watch this in better resolution, because what I do is I change the depth of the water relative to the injectors, and it either goes up or down. If that was floating on its own, it would be about 1/4 of an inch above the surface. So it's a blow in the egg, and then I've introduced water, so it's just got a bit of positive buoyancy. And it does all kinds of weird, wonderful things. Sorry?
By saying you've blown the egg, you've blown all...
Yeah, blow the yolk out, yeah. Didn't crack it open. I did crack one open, which you can also watch. I put a hole in the bottom, dropped it on the vortex, and it didn't sink. So I would float an egg with 2 holes in it. One on the top, one on the bottom. And that's worth watching, because when I did that, I was in King's, I thought, it was weird. Eggshell with a hole in it, and it sinks, and then you put it on the vortex, it just stays there, it floats. Anyway, when you start spinning things, you start seeing weird and wonderful stuff. It's like a different end of physics. Anyway, you get the... It's spinning, that's spinning round and round and round, and you're doing a bit of a precession as well. So I'm saying on here it works differently depending on the time of year, phases of the moon, and it's mainly temperature. So I ran this I wasn't on a meter, so I ran this for about 2 years on and off, maybe more. And so I used to go out and check it, I had the bedroom window open in summer, I could hear it running, I could hear it change, I could hear something. I even knew when somebody flushed the loo somewhere on the line because the pressure dropped. But it did odd things like in the middle of winter, like I was saying, if you characterise it, it'd be cold and blue, it'd be like really tight. And in summer it was warm and sort of red and sloppy. Just a subjective feeling. But, whoops, that's enough, I just got to go further. I wanted to do that because the other aspect to this is, it's, if you just read things as an intellectual process, there's no connection. You've got to do something that connects with what you're reading. If you want to read about chakras, then go and discover your own chakras, never mind what people have read. And I wanted to connect with Schauberger's work in some particular way, so I went and built the Vortex outside my house. It's still around somewhere. I think I've got a couple of others as well. That's the shape of the kudu, the one I mentioned earlier. That's the ideal shape, which is kind of weird. An animal should have done that, anyway. So I wanted to interact directly with his work, and that was as best I could do at the time. And across the top of that vortex are the 5 injectors made of brass. And I'd heard somewhere you could actually measure electrical potential in a vortex of many thousands of volts. So I was trying this with a voltmeter, and I couldn't get anything. I couldn't measure a darn thing. It was obviously the wrong thing. But I put a sheet of brass which shorted out all the injectors on the top, and I wanted to see if there was a potential across that brass. I didn't get anything, which is quite disappointing. But I went back a few days later, and thought somebody was having a game because it looked like there was wavy lines on this brass. And when I took it off and looked at it, I thought, it's the shape of the water. How the hell's that got on there? So I started doing a whole bunch of experiments which I've developed. This is over the last 5 years, I suppose, 5, 6 years, and more recently with work being done with ISIS up on in the peaks. There's all sorts of pictures of water, because this is a picture of water, which is to do with, you might say, I don't know, it's electrical charge, could be, but the water was dripping here. The actual size is about that. And the water is dripping in a nice line directly in the middle of the brass there. And I would say there's very little data. There is some, but there's very little. There might be something I haven't seen yet, data written there. It's only when it spreads out you start to get all this other stuff. This has not been photoshopped. I mean, it's lost a bit it's lost a bit in reproduction, colour-wise, but I've never used Photoshop on this. My beautiful young assistant. And now we've got about 4,000 pictures, and if we get time, when we come back, we'll show you some of them. There might be some on this, but I'll have to show you on the other screen. That's why we brought that, because the resolution on here is hopeless. Anyway, yeah, you can have a look. But, I mean, the way I think about it as a bloke is, when I showed...
John, Shift F5.
Shift and F5?
Yeah.
Okay, oh, there we go. So, we took a sample to the scanning electron microscope at Leeds University. And this is just one of the pictures. That's a human hair. Because I wanted to see what's on the surface that's making all these lovely colours. Because there's no dye there. It's dyeless colour, they call it, like a butterfly's wings, refracted light. So it's bending the light. So what's bending the light? I thought, well, it must be crystals. There's some facet on there that's bending the light. Well, how are they made? These are the questions I have, and I thought they might be able to answer them. Because it's full of PhDs down there. I'm sure one of them know. But they don't. Nobody knows, it seems, at present. But he didn't say a lot. I mean, he gave me a few... when we did the test, anyway, that's the scanning electron. You can see that's a human hair, that's the surface. They're about the same. For a comparison, 20 nanometers. That's pretty much zoomed in. But I didn't know, but I did have, over the following couple of weeks, there was about 60 hits from Leeds University, if not more, and maybe 100 from Manchester. I know it sort of tailed off, but there was hundreds of hits from Manchester and Leeds University. So something's doing the rounds. Anyway, this is showing us a very simple experiment to do. This is a brass sheet that's been cleaned with Brasso. In the early days, I was reusing all my sheets to get some more information to do with moving water. So water is just poured from my tap at home in the middle there, about there, and spread out. It's funny, when it spread out, it didn't take the Brasso off. It only took the Brasso off when it was spinning at the edge. So to me, the elasticity of the water when it reaches the resistance, if you like, the surface tension, has a limit, and it's there. So that's spinning that way, that's spinning that way, but they don't join. There's a gap in the middle. So you've got from one, you've now got two flows, and they spiral around each other. which I mean just intrigues me. And they stay, you know, it doesn't come apart, they stay in a flow. So if you watch the flow up, you tap, you'll see this sort of wobbly effect in the water. That's because the skeins of water are winding around each other. So these are some of the simple experiments that I do. And then you get on to, we haven't talked anything about what Schauberger got up to in the Second World War, because he being Austrian, Austria was annexed by the Germans, or the German army, or the German people, or however you want to look at it. But within Germany, there was also the Nazis. And within the Nazis, there was the Thule Society, and I've forgotten all the names of them. But some of them were way out and wacky. They were like, you know, Area 51. They all have their little tentacles, one of which was Peenemünde, which is all hot rockets, you know, it's one brown. And we all probably know most of the history about Project Paperclip, which is basically a deal. I mean, we know Bush's grandfather was funding both sides of the war, so somebody didn't give a shit who won at all. And the other thing, when you look at it, you see, when I was looking through the data, there's a book also written called The Hunt for Zero Point by Nick Cook, which you might have come across. And then there was a film made about it, a TV film about 5 years ago. And in the book, he goes through all the, you know, he worked for Jane's Defence Weekly. He was one of their main journalists, so he was off all over the world looking at new bits of kit that were flying and floating about. And they're all the hot stuff, they're all the, I call them repulsive rockets actually, because they're all working on repulsion, on chemistry, which is just the biggest, crankiest load of crap you can get if you want to move around. Anyway, so in the book he talks about all this stuff, and the biggest build-up, isn't he, right at the end, is Schauberger, Victor Schauberger, Implosion, worked for the Nazis, Second World War. Austria was annexed by the Nazis, so they said to Schauberger, work for us, we're going to hang you and all your family. So it was a done deal, so he worked for them, under the condition that, so the story goes, that he had good conditions for people who worked with him. But the point about it is, if you want to develop something to an extreme, you're going to need resource, and that doesn't mean coal necessarily. It also means brains and a concentration of brain power. So start a war, annex Poland. You work for us, mate. Get your ass over here now. So they could put all those brains together to come up with all kinds of wonderful, way out wacky stuff. And Peenemünde was just one of them. That was absolutely brilliant. If you can gyroscopically balance the flight path of a rocket, and never mind how the fuel's working, shape of the rocket, brilliant. Of course, they went on to make all the Saturn rockets based on the Peenemünde technology, the V2s. And that's how America got to them, if you believe they won. Maybe they didn't. It's pretty sure they didn't. Not in those bits of kit, anyway. Because of the radiation is the big thing, well, the big one. Never mind. No, anyway, there's all kinds of pros and cons to it. We'll get that. Shall we go?
Yeah, should we have a break?
Yeah.
We just covered lunatics, so we're all going to have a 15-minute stare at our time machine. Should we have a break? I'm cool. I'll just listen to it all night. Let's welcome back John Byde, everyone. Well done, thank you.
Well, it'd be nice to say this would be the second half, but you know, I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours. But the place it got to, I think, was Schauberger was hijacked by the Nazis. And it does lead us on to a very, well, I think it's a very interesting story. As I mentioned Nick Cook, and in the film he didn't mention Schauberger, but he did in the book. So mainstream wouldn't let out Schauberger. But he talked about it in the book, so there's books about this stuff, but it's not mainstream. I don't want to educate you too far. But anyway, when he was working for or with the Nazis, he developed some of these shapes, very unusual. I mean, this is, one that's on the screen now is a sectional view of the bio-submarines. And you can find all this in the books, the Eco-Technology series. There's a blue one with a repulsion on the front. That'd be the one to get if you're a bloke who wants to build a kit. That's the one I recommend you get. But there's an understanding that goes behind it, really, because the 4 books are like a degree course, and there's lots of info in there to think about and do your own experiments. But anyway, back to the Nazis. So they got hold of Schauberger and were building stuff, and apparently in the book, so it says, he had an interview with Hitler for about 3 hours. When he came out of that, Hitler talked to his money man and said, give this man all the kit he needs, whatever it is, and that's how the story goes. And in my mind, when I was thinking about it, there is this thing I call the repulsive, which you can look up. There might be some pictures on here, but it's got wavy plates in it, and it's got vanes, and it self-accelerates. Well, apparently, once it's up to speed, you have to slow it down. Otherwise, it self-accelerates, just keeps going. It makes a tornado above it, up which it goes. Disappears. So he's working for the Nazis. And at the same time, you know, at the end of the Second World War, Peeneman was the one, because everybody wants to know where all this flying stuff was coming from. So that's the one that Main Street got, which was all the hot rockets, or the repulsive rockets, I call them, which is a double meaning. It's working by repulsion, and compared to what else is possible, they are repulsive. Stinky, noisy, horrible, watch the birdie jump. So why do I say that? Well, you know, Project Paperclip, so the Americans decided they want this technology, and so rather than kill all the bad guys, the Nazis, they said, oh, come and work for us. We'll get you in under Project Paperclip, you know, we'll work out the paperwork later. So they got the hot rockets, that was Peeneman, basically, to my mind. It's a nice fly-about stuff, a few jet aeroplanes and that sort of thing. But what about the Foo Fighters? Remember the Foo Fighters from the Second World War? Was even a band named after them. How's that stuff working? So what they did was, there's your hot rockets, your hot nuclear, you can have a bomb to drop on people. Wow, everybody's watching this hot stuff. They piss off over to Argentina, Brazil, and New Schwabenland in Antarctica in what? Electrogravitic craft. Because when you start to move the fluids this way, on the cold side, you get your circulation that I was talking about. Only it's different this time. It's they're called electrogravitics. And what that means is you could, the early ones, they always had to land on a plinth. So they were never grounded because they wanted to maintain the charge on the craft. Well, now you're talking about moving a charged object through a charged medium. We talked about the capacitance fields. How far do they extend? So basically, what the Nazis did, or some aspects of it, because like I said, there were little splinters, there's big fat peanut under, there's the Air Force and their bombers, and then there's a bit more techie stuff like what was going on at the Wenceslas mine at the Bell. You've heard about that, I'm sure, they're flying about stuff up there using high tension electricity, and what they might have developed there. Wachowski covered that, and you can find him on Project Camelot, Gary Cassidy's early interviews on Project Camelot going back 3 years. And he talks about the Nazi Bell much more intelligently than I could. But it makes you wonder what they found. Also within the Nazi grouping, if you like, was the Brill and Thurber societies. Some of them, okay, back up a bit. Now what we've got, and mostly in the West, is a nice box. And in that box, a bunch of laws, physics, chemistry, and mathematics. Some of them are the laws of thermodynamics. These are the laws, you know, that's it. The Nazis thought, well, we'd like to fly about, not using the Calandra effect, so we'll take that box and tip it all out, and we'll put in whatever we think is going to work. So they went off to Kathmandu, they went off to India to find out about the Vimanas. Anybody heard about the Vimanas flying about stuff from a long time ago? And I suppose you've heard of the, what is it when you turn sand to glass? Anyway, when you turn sand to glass, well, if you heat sand up, you get a big area of glass. Like they have out in the desert where they did the atomic bomb tests, except they're finding big areas of glass in different parts of the world from thousands of years ago. And so that, you know, I've forgotten what it's called in India, but it's quite well known. And they talk about all the wars that they're quite, you know, there's guys in flying chariots and they're blowing smoke and flaming at each other. So anyway, the Nazis went off and found out about how the Vimanas were working. They talk about mercury engines, which sounds a bit dirty technology, but gets you off the ground. And basically what they were doing, the Nazi Bell, it was a variation, I don't know how they modified it, of mercury. But you get some very interesting effects if you get a fluid going round an object, and also the same type of fluid going in the opposite direction on that object. And if it's something like mercury, then you can get, I don't understand all the physics myself, not doing it that way anyway, gravity negating effects. So they were getting their stuff to fly about, and there's all kinds of UFO hits to do with things that look like acorns found in a woodland somewhere, and that, it might be about 15 feet long by about 9 feet wide, 10 feet wide, and it would be shaped like a bell, and it had some weird writing on the edges. So what they put in their box was anything that would float, that didn't need fuel, and maybe doesn't need a propeller. So that's what they built. And my feeling is they did disappear off to Argentina, Brazil, New Schwabenland as they call it, in their electrogravitic craft. These are just some of the drawings of this. You can find them all in the book. So, I mean, to me, I've never read that in any history book. It's just, I just sort of thought about it, and I got to this, there's the repulsive, now what? It's like footprints in the snow. Where did it all go? Because I think they did make some amazing breakthroughs and discoveries to do with all kinds of things that not only produce kit that floats around, but produces what we call free energy, or meterless energy. Now, they didn't use it to win the war, because the Nazis never surrendered. It was only the German people who surrendered. So whoever the group were that developed the technology didn't give a shit who won the war. But they did get some very interesting, focused energy to do with what they wanted to develop. So thank you very much. Thanks for all the fish, we're off. And they haven't told you. So you're still flying around in a tin can with a jet engine and driving behind an internal combustion engine, which is right, as if it's hot, it's producing deadly orgo. So it might shorten your life a bit, I don't know. So there's a weird story going on, and it gets even more weird when you introduce the Tesla technology and the Philadelphia experiment, and dimensional shifts, rifts, time. What is it? Because we as a race, or in our generation, if you like, been very used to solid things. I went to a little school in Durham, I went there as a junior school, infant school. This is 3D world. But apparently some people don't have the same attachments to time and place, or they might be able to move around. And you come across Dan Burrish. Well, I tell you what, my education was watching every video on Project Camelot, starting about 6 years ago when I found it, and other stuff since then. But there's, anyway, that was really my punchline to do with Schauberger. I could talk about all night. But there are people who are picking up the slack, if you like, to do with energy. And there's the Searle effect generator. John Searle's an Englishman. He's got circulating magnets, the SEG, which the Russians have done a rip-off as well and call it something else, but working the same effect, with lots of rotating magnets, circulation, and how you move stuff. And they have to keep it governed at a certain speed, otherwise it lifts off. And if you want to generate power, that's not an effect you want. You want whatever your kit is to stay on the ground, basically, to generate power. But when it gets too fast, it goes superconductive and it's not here anymore. It's either made a hole in your ceiling or it's just not here. And for more weird stuff to do with that, which I love, is Otis T. Carr's work with Tesla. And what's his name? I don't remember his name. He's still around, actually. I might remember his name, but basically, Tesla, he worked with all kinds of people, and he had somebody in his lab, Otis T. Carr, who was a bit of a gopher, but was quite a smart kid. And stayed with him, so the story goes, for a couple of years. And Tesla said, looks like they won't let me get this stuff out. It'll be up to you. You're not going to be around forever. So he handed on to Otis T. Carr, and it became the Otis C1, which is people manufacturing or starting to make in different pods around the planet. But this thing just didn't work like normal stuff. It was messing. See, when you increase your velocity or spin rate, you kind of mess with material, with time and space and all that sort of thing, so it gets a bit weird around the edges. But anyway, the OTC-1 was flying around Apple Valley in the late 60s, early 70s, until guess who turned up? So, sorry guys, you've had your chance, I'm going to fly back, we're shutting you down. That's not fair. Yeah, everybody's shutting you down. Shutting you down. Why is that then? Well, because you destroy the economy of the world as it is. I mean, it's a pretty weird story, isn't it? You can think about that if you like, because most of the value that we use, so in money, used to be based on gold, and that went out in the 30s. Then it was based on, well, they call it debt, but I suppose you could say based on oil, So, all that deal, I mean, it's all bullshit. The more you follow it, the more crazy it gets. You just got to watch the Kaiser report and RT to get a handle on that, which is more interesting. So, if you've got if your money exchange is based on the value of something like gold, because it's difficult to dig out of the ground, or it's based on oil because it's the same thing, then everybody's going to exchange more of it for them to collect, I suppose, which is a rather stupid idea on how to run things, because when the time comes when you've got your free energy device, which is as big as a handbag, putting out 2 kilowatts or 15, you can fly about wherever you want. So that means you can nick off to Brazil, talk to the natives, get a little quarter-acre of land, grow all your crops, fly back when you're ready to harvest. You might come back to Disley, you might come back to Manchester or Birmingham because you like it, but there's no limits on where you go. Because you've got all the power you need, all the light you need, all the food you need. What do you need the club in London with the big clock for? Yeah. Is that to manage your wars? I don't know. And I wouldn't give a shit, because I'm growing my stuff in Brazil. It's a bit mind-bending when you think about it like that. But if you think about what the Nazis did and where they went, they didn't stick around to share with everybody what they'd discovered. What was the incentive? So if you developed your flying saucer next week in your shed, who are you going to tell? Who are you going to take it to the pub and show your feet? It's got a vertical take-off car. Might be hand-painted, but watch what it does. You're going to tell a soul if you've got any sense. I mean, it's like the old story of finding a bag of money. I mean, just drop a £20 note at a pub, a busy pub, and say, anybody dropped a 20? Oh yeah, what was some of that? You're not going to tell anyone. There's no incentive to tell anyone, apart from some places like Panacea Bocaf, they call it, which is the sort of open source university. And there's the Breakthrough Energy Movement, and that's Gamble and a whole bunch of other guys who I've got to know over the years because I've been in touch with them, like Jason Babelli and Grice, and they're all open sourcing it and showing it on YouTube, how you put things together. But pulsed magnetic motors, there's the KEPE motor, KEPPE, there's the Morgado Mighty Tiny engine. Now that is an internal combustion engine, but its power-weight ratio is 40 to 1. The most efficient jet turbine we have is struggling to get over 30. So that means he can put an engine which is 9 inches long and 5 inches wide, equivalent to a V6 in your motor car. Already we have these technologies. I'll just say we already have a vast amount of technologies, never mind the 6,000 patents that were bought up by various companies and are still under lock and key. Stan May developed a car running on water 10 years ago. He well, it was poison. Anyway, there's loads of stuff out there. Do you have any questions on that sort of feeling stuff or wanted to know anything before I move on? Where you find the stuff? Oh, the other simple thing...
to see a working device.
A working device. I'll tell you where I'd start. Is put in Google top 10 exotic free energy devices. You'll get to what's it called? I can't remember now. But you put that in, you get to a site, and he just lists them all. I can't remember the guy's name now. I've talked to him a couple of times. Sterling D. Allen, yeah.
Top 10.
Exotic free energy devices. And that's as good as start point or breakthrough energy movement then.
Yeah, it's talking about sending 2 flows around of the same material opposite each other. This is what CERN's doing on a grand scale.
Trying to, haven't they?
Trying to.
Yeah. Well, look for the God particle, do you?
Well, that's bollocks, obviously. But what are they doing behind the scenes?
Well, there might be all kinds of spin-offs.
Is it, just a thought, is it for the mass production of flying saucers?
I would have thought so. They're not going to mass produce any flying saucers, not for you lot.
No.
You lot are staying in motor cars as long as possible, burning gas.
False flag alien attack.
Oh, yeah, we'll have some of that. Oh, yeah, a bit of false flag aliens.
I think they only built it for that damn brain, not shut it.
Oh, it's that way round.
Yeah. Just one big set. And Brian Cox, who's still there.
So you go down from the pub and look at this, oh, there's another Messiah. Oh, how you doing, mate? Run towards the light, humans. We'll save you, don't worry. We're manufacturing all these free energy devices and UFOs for you as you sit here tonight. This is the Minister of Energy and Aeronautical Engineering from the place with the big clock in London, what we call it now. What do I think about it, sir?
Have you heard of the Bloom box?
Yeah, the bloom box, sorry.
Yeah.
Which is apparently not entirely free energy, but everybody, Google's got them installed on their site as of about 18 months ago. It looks good though, wouldn't knock it. But
Still on the grid though.
yeah, still on the grid. Now that's the other interesting thing is this transition, because we're on stepping stones, aren't we? On the one side we've got horse and cart, on the other side we've got no grid. We're all off grid, we've got free energy. How would you get from there to there? Because there's all this momentum into digging more holes in the ground, and China's powering everything by burning coal. So you need intermediate technologies which get them clean. That's probably hydrogen, which is the efficient splitting of water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then mix that in with the coal dust and you get a clean, more efficient burn, so that they don't have to choke themselves as they follow on. But eventually all of the big stuff will be totally redundant.
Why didn't you use it?
Why do you use what?
Here,
Well, yeah, why not?
because it's magnetic.
Yeah, it's all this. Once it's
Have you heard of
spinning.
Joe Booker?
Mm,
Have you heard of Joe?
no.
Joe Booker in Australia done it in 1992.
Was this the wind hex you talk about? Is it the wind hex?
No, he run a car, a Rover, the C6 engine, aluminium on air, and he then adapted it to run on the Mark II Escort 1995, and of course it was warned not to release it, but the mate of it.
Oh, Joe, you talk about the Joe cell? No?
Yeah, he doesn't relate to that, basically.
Oh.
His mate Peter Stevens set up.
Oh, yeah. Hey, look, don't go into the history of it now because we've got so much to
Yeah, but
cover.
what I'm saying is, air is the thing. Tesla knew again all about air.
Yeah.
Air isn't a source for implosion, explosion. Air is a source for lightning, static, positive and negative discharging in the engine. And it's called an ice engine, an industrial combustion engine. It's called an ice engine. And Joe Booker will show you on his videos, it's Joe's cell, Ulcer's mouth. It shows you his Mark II Escort running.
Yeah, no,
But basically, he's done the thing you said. He's staticized the engine oil, positive and negative before he's put it in, no earth to the engine. He's then charged the water, positive and negative, which you're right, it does get cold, it runs cold. And then it charges two solenoids pulsing back onto the engine. That's the point on that.
Oh, good.
It's doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's...
I've just found the logic out. It's all weak.
Well,
Statically charge the engine.
well, a bit I liked. Don't go into any more detail because I don't have the time.
I've issued it for free anyway.
Yeah, Joe Cell is Eastern Australia. I think
Lismore.
you can look at all his stuff.
Yeah. And it's invented now with Lutech.
You did?
I haven't heard that from him.
No, this is another question about...
Back to water, you were saying about water and the flow. Is there a certain thing, is there anything we should do to water before we drink it to kind of bring it
Swirl
back
it.
to life?
Swirl it, and you know from Emoto's work that intention has an effect. So have a water corner, and you energize that water corner with whatever positive vibe you want, which assume it is, and then spin it. And if that's all you've got, otherwise you get it from the high mountain streams where it's already charged, if you like. But if you've got dead water that you're using that comes, it's called a water corpse that comes out of your tap, because it has no energy, life energy in it. The only life energy it's going to get before you drink it is whatever you put in it. That's why, you swirl it, spin it. I've got a bottle, I put a crystal in and just spin it. And then I spin it the other way, so I get like the energy kind of idea going on, anything like that. There's all kinds of systems out there now. But that's the least you can do. But I'll just say that the best thing you can say about water that comes out of your tap is it's wet. And that's why Dan Winter's developed the Implosion nozzle, which is spinning the water both ways, getting better growth rates. People are using them as showers, as energizers. They were used before then as well. Because when you spin the water, you energize, you just energize it.
Is this something you stick on your tap?
Sorry?
Is this something you stick on your taps?
Yeah, on your taps, yeah, you can just switch out your shower nozzle for an Implosion nozzle. You'll have to search them, but they're sold in Germany, they're quite expensive. Dan Winter's kit's about 300 quid.
Dan Winter got it off of Joe Booker.
Well, he could have got it from there, he could have got it from,
He did get it off of Joe Booker because it shows how to make it.
what's he called? His name's not. But there was a guy who did a lot of work on those shapes with Dan Winter.
Joe Booker showed him how to make it. Four rugby ball magnets in a funnel. You're right, he did copy.
Stan Tenen was the other guy. Stan Tenen was the other guy. You'll have to come up and do a talk on your stuff. So eventually, I'm not saying, but I've just got to move on. I just want to mention as much info as I can, because that's the hydrogen inside, and this hydrogen cracking, as they call it.
That's what I'm saying.
The Joe cell is not a hydroxy unit.
He doesn't use the Joe cell. He
Well,
uses air. Like Hitler used air on the Volkswagen vehicle. The people's
yes,
car.
to do with the charge separation, I would call it.
Yeah.
But there's other things, phenomena, I mean, we mentioned just other cells or other ways of doing things. Most people are using hydroxy to split the hydrogen and oxygen and using that. The Joe cell wasn't using that, it was using orgone energy that Bill Helmreich talked about. Because there's a blank pointing at the carburettor and there's no direct connection. So how's it working? They even had odd effects, like trucks 2 inches off the ground. And they would move as you drove them and go around corners, but the wheels weren't touching the ground. They cannot explain these effects. Unless it's something to do...
So easy, static.
Well, do this talk. You'll have to come and do the talk, so I don't have to move a lot.
You just need to think how the lights flow.
I've got you. Hey, Andy, can you do something here?
That's it.
Check him out. Anyway, there's loads of...
Making it sound hard.
No.
It's so simple.
Wait,
You just got to tell people
Sorry,
it's
mate.
charges.
We're just really short on time, so as I said, I want to be lovely. You can Skype John Byde on Watergrass Art, but we've got to just let the speaker finish the talk, mate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's a little bit more. I'll just finish off. I mean, I don't know. We're nearly done. We've got a little timer.
Yeah,
that mentioned?
20 minutes.
Half an hour. There's loads of stuff you could cover because I don't know why. Like I said, I've read books, I've read everything I could see or find to do with free energy and anything I floated around on the internet, and then got talked to people and found it was,
Just quickly, is it true there's a guy in Belgium who's got a kit for about £4.5 grand that can get you off grid?
Belgium sounds like Kesh. Are you sure it's not Kesh Foundation?
Maybe I'm talking from a position of huge...
There might be others, because there's people doing all sorts of things. If they've got an efficient way of cracking water, which again is frequency and how you do it, that also leads on to Pons and Fleischmann's implosion device, which was in the late 90s, which was destroyed, if you like, but that's like a controlled cavitation, I would call it. And you get implosion, and you get light emittance and vast amounts of power. There's plenty of people, look at the ones that suggested top 10 exotic free energy, and you can follow any route you like, whether it's the water side, electrical, magnets, magnetic side. The thing about magnets is permanent magnets, as you know, stick to each other. So the problem has always been to gauge the flux efficiently, because as you went past the point where you were attracted to, you were now sucked back so it wouldn't turn. Well, they figured out a way of gating the flux through different materials, and basically I think it's a solenoid. It's a bit like, what's his name out in wherever it was, from Nigeria, Leeds Scotland, Coral Castle, because he had stuff floating about. You can look in them as well. So there's all kinds of magical, beautiful ways of doing this. There's loads out there. There's electrical ways, Tom Bearden talks about, Bedini talks about, and then you look up I'd look up Stubblefield, I'm still studying it, the old stuff 100 years ago. Anyway, if you want to talk about this, talk about charge, I did a few experiments, because like I said, I wanted to relate to what I was learning about Schauberger. I'm not sure if these are in an order. But I could do it, I think. There we go. So what I did, as I was telling you, was I had these brass nozzles on my the thing I was working with, and I shorted them out with a bit of a brass strip. And when I took it off, there were all these patterns on there. And then I took them to the scanning electron microscope. Which catalog is it? Oops. That one. So this is really, I'm just going to run through some of the pictures just to... That's the first one. These are the earliest pictures I took of this effect. And that top one is the one that was wrapped around the top of the bottle with all the water doing a wavy, wobbly thing around the top from the injectors. So each spurt, that pump is an injector, and then it's wrapped around the top of the bottle, and I've just unrolled it. So after about 4 days, I saw that effect, and I thought the kids had been having a go with a felt-tip pen, and they're going to really tear into one, messing with my stuff. So I did that picture, and the bottom one is the outflow from the bottom of from the Vortex bottle. So I wanted to find out about the shapes that the water was making. The same colour separation you get when you heat treat steel, from straw to peacock blue. But this is the cold end, it's all done cold. So, I've asked people about this, the metallurgists and all the rest of it, they don't have a clue, didn't have a clue in Leeds. Or at least, if they did have a clue, they didn't tell me. So these are some of the very early pictures. I mean, some of you think are a bit, wow, no, looks like an angel in there. You know, what's that doing? There's geometry, structures. Well, this is another early one I did, which has got two jets coming in opposite directions because I wanted to see what was happening with the turbulence. Because what it's telling me, it's showing me a picture of water as it moves across the brass sheet. And wherever I call it turbulence, I get a change in colour. And then I think, well, the change in colour must be related to charge in the water. And you think, well, it's water, it must be grounded. Where's it getting its charge from? And if it's a charge, what is it?
John, could I just ask a question? Has anybody suggested to you that these colour effects that we're getting are analogous to a diffraction grating? And you've got this granulation on the surface at a very, very small scale, nanoscale. That's interfering with the light. And
so you get those effects now. Nobody suggested that. I'll have to talk to you later. So so these pictures, I've got two conditions. The wet condition when they're being made, and then when you take them out, dry them, put them in front of your camera and take a picture. So that one's got water on it. I mean, it's beautiful as it is.
What water did you use?
Just
Rainwater?
that's tap water. This is tap water.
Rainwater's got a different charge.
Well, it's not dead once you spin it. Once you start to spin it, it's not. It starts to energize then. And then you can get other effects. You get piezoelectric effects from crystals that you might have in the bottom. Because they knock against each other. I don't know if you know this, but if you compress a crystal, it'll release an electrical charge. You've got the lighters, which don't have flints. You just press and you compress, get a spark, ping, light your gas. Well, you can do the same in your bottle. You get your rocks chinking around and releasing subtle energy. And the other thing is, we know from OOTO's work with crystals that your intention affects the water because it's documented. A bit like Benveniste and homeopathy, the French scientist. And he basically said when he finished all his research that water has a memory. Of what? You live in London. God, you can imagine all that stuff. What memories has it got in there? Never mind the pharmaceuticals. But to my mind, there's, if you create a strong vortex, like I was doing with the bottle, run your water through that, that's a good start. Because I think you're wiping memory, at least spreading it so thin that you can then reprogram it. And if you get some powerful magnets there as well, it doesn't have to be that powerful, arranged around it. I'm not quite sure it might be north-south, but you could look it up. Then you'd alter that as well. I think that's the nearest you could get to wiping memory. Plus your intention, because that must have the biggest effect. Anyway, these are all, that's one that's just starting. This is one of the first ones. Where are we going? That's just a simple water jet. At the top, you've got a little brass nozzle. These are just because it was leaking. These words here, because it was one of the nozzles from my spinny thing, and the soldering wasn't that good. So it's leaking at the top, those two spurts. But that's the pattern it's started to make on a sheet of brass, just from a jet of water. And that was just from mains water. So yeah, it's on tight then. There was all sorts of things I got interested to do with water. I put this out under when the Pleiades were in confluence with the Sun and the Earth and the Moon a couple of years ago. So it was interesting to see if I could get any variations, but I haven't got it supple enough yet. But it was good fun. This is one that was laid in the bottom of a stream. It was just a thin sheet, just laid it in there to see what it would do. And you get, of course, you can see the bright blue colour. And this is another one from the bottom of the vortex. The outflow from the vortex. Because I'm interested in whatever I can measure. I didn't have any measuring kit. I could walk about in a stream, but I wanted to measure charge. That was my intention. But I didn't have a, accurate thermometer. I only had a voltmeter. So the brass presented itself, and I've developed it since then, because it's shown me a lot of things to do with the structures in water.
You know, sort of the van picture with the balloon in it, that sort of form. If you look at the sun, you get those.
Yeah, you do. Same thing. That's what I think.
And you see it sort of
Well, it's funny you should say that, because this was two brasses put together, so I was wondering what effect light had, so I put two brasses together so there was no light. It was just, the water was flowing in from a vortex at the top here. This is a reflection, so that's my lampshade and that's my sun. I said, take a picture quick before it dries out. So he was up to take a picture. So that's him there. But these other structures are all to do with the patterns the water makes. And the thing about it is it's fractal, because the closer you go in, the more structures there are. You just keep seeing more. The only limit I've got is the resolution of my camera, and which I haven't done a lot on yet, I must say, but how highly polished the brass surface is. Because the polishing leaves indentations or areas where, it's like looking through a grating. You can't see any further than the polishing of the brass, it seems to me. So that's one of the next things to do, but these are some of the images. This is another one that was... This one, there's no Photoshop in any of these. So, I'm losing tracking. I just wanted to talk about this one. This was done on the Venus confluence, because I wanted to see what was happening, if there was anything I could see in the cosmos to do with, the confluence, which was so important. I think it was a couple of years ago. So I developed this picture, but basically that was just water, it was like a spout of water about that diameter hitting in the middle there, and it was left there for, how long was left there, do you remember? About a week, because these effects don't appear straight away. And some of the brasses that we're working on now have been in the water for months, and you get a different effect. Some are in, if I want to take a snapshot to develop a picture, it's like developing a picture almost like you used to do with chemicals, in the old days, before digital. It takes up to 5 days before you can see a decent picture. You would start to see something after the first day that would be very faint. And that might be why nobody's really noticed this, because it takes so long for it to show itself. But there's no Photoshop in there, there's just light, reflected off there. So you get these amazing pictures, that's reflected light. If you get the angle right, depending on the incident angle relative to your camera, then it will get to a sort of flash point. If it's not surface lit, it's lit by reflection from behind the camera. If you shine light on it directly, it just washes out, you can't see anything. But if you light it properly, then you can, which is turned into an art. We should have a look at some more. So there's all these different varied effects. This one was a bit special because what I decided to do was put it in a very fast-flowing stream. All the others are either in the bottom of the stream, and you get a certain characteristic pattern from that because of the flows. But if you put them in the air with a stream impinging on them, you get a different set of patterns. This one, as I said, was horizontal, and the water was dripping in the middle. But if you let the water build up like an inch deep above that, you get a different pattern. You still get a radiant pattern, but it's altered. So, to me, this is a blueprint. I'm going to back engineer this. So, this is what's going on in my head, being a bloke. It's telling me the story. It's also known as the Blue Man, which you can see developed up there, which is quite psychedelic. This one was the one that was in a fast-flowing stream, and it didn't really touch the sides. I think it might have rested on a rock or some moss on this side. But when we pulled this out, it was just an even colour. It didn't even look like a brass. It just looked like a brass sheet. But as it dried out, these colours appeared, which I'd never seen before. So, I was talking about the body and the heart earlier. I think the blood flows through the body with zero resistance. No resistance. The only time it gets any resistance is two conditions. One's injury, or the other disease, an ulcer or something. And what the body's designed to do is repair that turbulence so it is all resistance-less. Obviously that's a process. But I think the inside of all the blood vessels and the blood flow in them with serum is a frictionless process of blood movement. And I say that because that was an even colour blue, so that is zero resistance. It's just in a laminar flow, no turbulence. But if you get onto the other ones, I'm not sure if it's the next. Maybe not that one, but there was another one earlier which was full of colour. Now that one was under a flow with moss, so there was loads of turbulence all over that, and all that turbulence wrote data to the brass. Laminar flow. So that's what goes on in my head. So you map one thing over the other, which kind of makes sense. Which makes you look again at how the body's actually functioning, and that's why I said it's so important to ground. Because the charge in the body affects everything to do with the blood, the corpuscles, and how they hang together or not, clump together. See, we're all walking around rubber. If you got leather, that's better. This one was, this changed over time because water levels changed on the peaks. So it started off, I think, out there, which is quite a lot of flow, so it made a bigger pattern, and then reduced over time. And then something else changed, and there was another flow which actually erased some of the data, if you like, of the earlier one, and rewrote this. And the close-ups down here looks like a Greek temple. These lines are absolutely perfect, like they're a fine pencil drawing. This is just other experiments. These are all early experiments. That's just a piece of wrinkly brass as it's positioned in the water and the colours start to develop. And these are some of the early pictures to do with what we're finding. So you just see more of the shape of the water, how it dripped. That was one that's at an angle, the water is dripping like that. I like this one. I did a lot of work on this one just because this area was so fascinating. This is where this was moss and rock here, so that's why I made all this data, or wrote all that data. That was where the water flowed again. It was up there and then the water level reduced. But some of these details look like they're carved out of rock, like you would in some entrance. That's another early experiment.
Excuse me, John.
Yeah.
Is it possible to fold your laptop down a bit?
Well, this one. That one.
Thank you.
This is when it started to get a bit more interesting, and we had to get some pretty serious kit. We had to get a 150mm macro lens, which you can focus that close, and a decent digital camera. DSLR, they call them. Anyway, it's a bit techy. And there was loads of experiments to get the lighting right, to get some of the effects. But that's a close-up. That area, I suppose, and if you're looking at it, it'd be about a square inch. That's a huge close-up.
Have you tried putting that into polarized light?
Yeah, tried polarized light. Didn't get any huge effects on that. Did get some. I've done it with polarized lights and a polarized filter on the camera and altered them and twisted them and rotated them and anything that would show or illuminate. This one came out of the stream, which became known as Jake's stream because of this character over here. And it looked like he'd written us a message here, this green writing along here. Because when you zoom into it, it looks like it's writing. I think there's even a J at the beginning. There it is, right at the very beginning. J for John. So there's all kinds of ways of looking at this. It's like it gets a bit tricky sometimes. So go on a journey into this stuff. You forget the water's done it, and you're off on a level.
It's the intention, that's all it is.
Yeah. But I just want to say that the water drawn on this. This is all water. There's no Photoshop. Some, clever lighting here and there. And it's on the surface of a brass. I've done a whole section as well. Some of it's on the website, which is waterbrassart.com, to see some more. And they're very thin films that are in water tanks. And it's very thin films because I wanted to see what was happening close to the surface of the brass. So I did all these experiments with thin films of water. So far, I suppose I've taken over 4,000 pictures now, and we've got well over 100 brasses. Anyway, as they go on. I'll see how I can get on to the other file. Yeah, for the Turner Prize. Which she...
The bricks, no, the brick side, I'm not the bricks.
Which is the most spectacular of these, do you think, of these files? Yeah, which is the recent one's 10th? Is it 21st, 22nd? Okay, well, I'll keep shifting. These are the most recent ones, 27th of October. That one? There's a few on here. These are just taken recently. These lines here are scratches on the surface of the brass. But some of these are just...
That really looks like the inside of the body. Yeah.
I mean, some of these, I don't know what, I was thinking, it's like a nebula or something. Because all the shapes I've seen through the Hubble telescope, of the Horsehead Nebula and other nebula and exploding stars I've seen in these brasses. I've seen it from the microbes on the brasses to things that could be galactic. So what I do is I sort of look for landscapes and how to make sense of some things because they're so abstract or something like that. Well, many a happy hour, I tell you.
Just out of curiosity, how much is the brass telling you that? And this is a very wrong point. The brass is telling you something about the water.
Yeah.
How much is the water telling you about the brass? In other words, if it's not standardised, you're going to get a variable plane underneath the water.
Oh, there's a whole bunch of, I would say, standard experiments to do with this, but I haven't done them yet. I mean, to do that, I'm going to, it'd have to be properly done.
And also, silicon runs of the water on the brass and how the brass will filter, because for me, the brass is like writing paper and the water writes on the
What if the writing is on the brass and the water's exposing it? I'm playing it the other way round.
I don't think so.
You're talking about, no.
It's a nice idea.
You want a standardised brass plate that you cut up into sections that you know is exactly the same that you perform different water experiments on. Otherwise, you've got a variable you're not controlling.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the other thing. that's why you'd have to know probably how the brass was prepared, what its alloy is quantitatively, how it's finished. I mean, I suppose it depends how We tend to be ordered to get it. It's like us blokes want to measure everything. But I don't know, that could be one of the next steps, I suppose.
I mean, it's a hugely difficult experiment, sorry to throw that at you, but
Does it have to be brass?
Yeah. You don't get it, but I've tried just about everything I get my hands on to get
Like
it.
copper and stuff like that.
Yeah. Bronze, silver, not much. Iron, rust, but not much. Nothing like this. This is the best. Give me brass.
Yeah.
So far, I don't know, maybe if there's other experiments. I mean, it's pointing in a direction. Maybe if you charge the thing before you put it in, you might get another thing.
What is brass again?
It's brass, there's right, there's copper and...
Zinc.
Yeah, copper and zinc. Bronze is copper and tin. Is that right? Because I got this wrong last time. I was saying, which one is it? I was tin copper.
Zinc.
There's the two major alloys are either zinc or tin with copper.
Yeah.
To make
So
either
it's Brill.
bronze or other common ones. There's all kinds of variations. Are we doing? We nearly done 5 minutes. So I was trying to get back to the start. Quite difficult doing this, right? How's this work now? Hang on.
Do you think it's the water molecule in that or the charge in the water molecule?
I think what's happening is that as soon as you've got water moving past itself, it generates a static charge somehow. And the reason I say that, it reminds me of the reason why we call it electricity is that fossilized amber was called electrum, which means Greek, isn't it? The electrum, that's what we've got, electricity. And when you rub that with silk, you've got a static charge, which you could feel. Now, I think the water's rubbing past itself, generating that charge. So I think the air can do it as well. And then when it impinges on the brass, you see it's already fallen somewhere, so it's already spinning, and then it hits the brass and it's going off in different directions than the water sees. The most spectacular ones are through things like moss, rather than just a rock, because of all the interstices and little whirling things. But that's the only I get it, and that quite answers it.
John, could you see how long these images last in the brass?
Years so far. There is some that have sort of faded away or oxidised quite a lot.
Will stay that long?
What, pattern? Yeah, I'd say it's... Oh, yeah.
And the other thing was, I was just thinking that you're using the brass with water, and I was thinking that in musical instruments, brass is used to make different sounds with all the trumpets, saxophones, all the brass sections. It's brass.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
the sound of
Because it works better.
air and the breath.
Well,
Brill saw a slide there of Lord Kelvin's thunderstorm.
Yeah.
It's talking about where
Yeah.
it builds a charge up itself just by.
that's right.
So passing it through the metal coil does what as well?
What in Lord Kelvin's?
Yeah, it goes through, each stream goes through a metal coil, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, when it goes through one, and I just asked them to answer it, when it goes through one, you won't get anything noticeable. But they've got 4. So the charge on that one is linked, shorted out to the cup at the base of the other. So it falls through that one, generates a charge, which it ships over here. And then the other one's doing the opposite. So you've got a bifurcation of charge, a posi and a negi. But how it floats, that is interesting, because the water eventually doesn't touch, it goes back up, doesn't it? Once it's got going, it starts to float. Yeah, flies, it goes, don't want to fall through there, I've got a charge, I'm going up here. And it starts to circulate around, if it's a ring, it'll circulate around the cups. I don't know how it does it, I just call it electron effect, friction.
Have you tried, you say you're using tap water, have you tried doing it with distilled water?
No, I haven't tried distilled water. All these experiments are tap water or the peaks.
Only because watching something recently, it seemed where energy was being created from water, it seems to be that when it's got tap water, it seems to have more of a charge than distilled water.
Tap water does.
Well, I can't remember what I watched, but it was something to do with someone doing distilled water and got this piece of equipment and put it in the tap water. It was in America, because there's lots of like little stuff in the water. And you could see that there was a charge. And then when you put it in the distilled water, there was no charge at all. But I don't know whether you get the same.
Well,
This is the chemical
that's right. Well, the thing is about
causing the charge.
distilled water, that's what Schauberger called juvenile water, and it's hungry. It wants anything that can...
Stick to it.
Yeah, it'll stick to it, and it can make a charge with, because, as the saying goes, you get no fish in pure water.
Because what I'm trying to say is if you didn't get the same effect with the distilled water, that would be telling you that something that was in the...
I think that's an ace idea. You got the job, come on over.
We had a Coke bottle running for 2 years. This is a long-term project.
It is, man. Anyway, these are water drops, so you get the scale of this one, but this is a very recent one from what we call the shrines. There's an area we name them, Jade Strange Shrine, Waterfall, Stonehenge, where we place brasses, because we get particular effects there, generically. And this one is from a place where it's just got a nice little drip off the moss, a very pencil thin. Same one that made that. It's been raining quite a lot recently because this is very fresh, it's only a few days old. So there's more than one drip. There's been a drip in the middle there, and there's been another one here. But the detail of the folding, and this looks like the back of a beetle, and all these amazing areas. You know, if I just looked at those, I thought somebody's a good abstract painter. You know, crap on, mate. And of course, the abstract painter is the water. So this is just lit from the ceiling light in the living room with a nice bit of a tilt on it, so it gets a bit of a flare. And after all these years of work, is that the best you could do?
Got the old flower and
So last time I'm coming in.
she hasn't done any creative writing.
She's... Yeah, okay. Sorry.
So, I wonder if you're a paleochemist and whether someone could actually scrape off the surface of that and find the oxides of copper and zinc.
That was the idea down at Scanning Electron. I thought they were going to tell us all that stuff. Well, they did actually. They told us the basic outputs, which were like carbon. There's a whole chemical thing there. Didn't float my boat, but I've got the report. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the next thing, there's other things I've seen in here, depending on where they're left and how long they're left, because when you do close-ups in some areas, you'll see a little fleck of red, and you think, what the hell is that? They'll dust it to make sure it's not stuck. And of course, you brought it very carefully from the stream, and, you know, forensically placed it ready to be filmed. But this bright red, like a ruby red, like a crystal of ruby. I said, is that ruby? Tiny. And then there's other stuff I've seen there. There's plenty of crystals, so it's growing things, and it's growing them on charge. It leads you to all kinds of funny ideas, because there is low energy nuclear change, LENC something, and there's Dr. Champion has done all the work on that. I don't know if it's a bullshit or what, but he's changing copper into gold. He's jolting the electrons, a little shell out. He's going to heat it up to a certain temperature and bombard it with microwaves, and they'll go jiggle, 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 pop. And what you're left with is gold to cool it down. That's Dr. Champion.
Where do I buy one of them machines from?
Yeah, I was saying. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Yeah, I thought about all of this. Don't worry, I have. I thought when I saw Repulsion, I'm getting down the way out to buy one of those, and bring in buy, whatever it's called.
You've got gold there. Is that the same as cold fusion?
What?
Cold fusion as well? Is that similar?
Cold fusion. Well, that's the Pons Fleischmann type stuff in the bottle with the fizzy bombarding.
It's more about Stan Meyer inventing new products with the supercooling and all of the hydrogen separation. It's starting to say there's things here that don't exist.
Yeah.
And they're doing things that they shouldn't do.
They shouldn't do that. I often say that when I see this stuff. It shouldn't do that.
Well, you've got your 3 laws, you see.
See, I was thinking about this. I came up with a little joke. I thought, well, I'm going to invent a law. We're going to say, okay, the law is the ground. I know we're on the Earth, isn't it? The ground's not moving, is it? No? Is that agreed? Can we be agreed the ground is not bloody moving, yeah? So your chairs aren't moving, are you?
If they are, you've got an inner ear infection.
So you're onto them. Anyway, you could say, the ground's not moving, therefore the law is, the ground is not moving, therefore anything touching the ground is not moving. Yeah? What's wrong with that? So you're not going to walk, and you're not going to roll a wheel. And that's what science does with its laws. And the other point about that is, the measuring systems that you use are the wake of discovery of a boat called Discovery. That's what you're finding. You found some stuff, oh, it does this, let's measure. How warm is it? How big is it? How cold is it? Oh, look at that. So they measure it all, and they call those laws, and they call that physics, chemistry, whatever you want to call it. But the wake doesn't push the boat, does it? So you're going to go places you ain't been before, and then you're going to measure it. But that's the wake. That's where people get stuck, because they think that, because everybody else discovered it and invented the laws, which are wonderful shortcuts. You know, they can be. There's various pi, and it's quite handy. But the things that are impossible to discover is not from the wake. Great! Bloody marvellous!
I was going to say, that was it, that was the end. Shall we? We should.